Another day, another Final Fantasy review is coming at you from me. After showing Final Fantasy I the respect it deserves, and then cruelly mocking 2 for being the younger brother who just couldn't be as successful or beloved as the older sibling, we now reach the Nintendo Entertainment System era's third child, Final Fantasy III, a game that many praise as the best Final Fantasy from that era. The one that took the best parts of 1 and 2 and combined them together to create something truly special. Now, compared to the first two, Ani actually had some former experience with 3, mainly playing some of the remake on the DS when I was younger. But I had never touched the original version, mainly due to it not really being released as much as the other games, or at all, considering we never got the original in America until the Pixel Remaster. And after playing it, I can see why it became so beloved. So what did I like? What did I dislike? Well, let's get into that, shall we? It's Crimson Rosso, and welcome to my review of Final Fantasy III, and how it was almost perfect. Alright, let's get into our first order of business. Final Fantasy III's Pixel Remaster looks insanely fucking beautiful. Now, it's not a surprise they look good. After all, if I just showed you a still image of 3's remaster, you would probably be able to notice how nice it looks. But my jaw fucking dropped when I saw it in action throughout the games. NPCs and towns had a beautiful level of detail to them. Monsters and bosses are brought to the modern age with their stunning revitalization. And the dungeons, ooh boy, the dungeons sure are sexy. So much goddamn love was put into this remaster to make it feel as incredibly faithful as humanly possible. Honestly, I'd love to see Square use this style of graphical remasters for some of their other series. Imagine something like the original Dragon Quest getting this kind of remaster, or maybe turn an entirely new IP with it instead. Well, technically they have Octopath Traveler for that, but that's just some hopium for me. Anyways, let me get on with the rest of the video. So, how about we talk about the combat up next? So, with Final Fantasy II's combat and experience system not really vibing with a lot of people, myself included, Square decided to instead return to form and make 3 have a more standard style of gameplay, more in line with the first game. Turn-based combat, gain experience to gain a level up, you know, the works. But that doesn't mean they just slapped one combat on here and called it a day, as there were quite a few interesting additions to the formula that make it feel genuinely different. First is the use of magic outside of battle being expanded upon. In both 1 and 2, the only magic ever really used outside of battle was Cure or Ezuna, maybe even Rise if you felt like it. 3 changes this up by introducing dungeons that require the use of certain spells to progress. A perfect example is in the early game Nepto Temple, where you have to cast Mini on your entire party in order to enter it. Or when you head to the Tower of Owen and can only progress past the first room unless everybody is a toad. I honestly really like this idea, as it adds more interactions with the world itself. Plus, let's be real here, how many of us were actually going to use Mini and Toad in any fight, ever? Speaking of magic, let's get to talking about the change made to it. Unlike the older titles where the higher the spell, the more MP it uses, every spell in 3 now costs exactly 1 MP point to use, and these points are separated by the level of the spell, which actually adds an all-new layer of strategy to the game that I really liked. After all, you could use one of your dozen cure spells to get you a little bit of health, or you could try your luck with a Kurga spell, even though you can only use a level 5 spell about 3 or 4 times. The same can be applied to black magic as well. You could launch a level 6 black magic spell on a set of jobber enemies, sure, but that also means you're losing a heavy hitting spell that you could possibly be using on a boss later down the line. It's a unique system that does come with a couple of flaws that we will chat about later, but that's for later. For now, we gotta get back to talking about the good parts of gameplay, and I saved the best thing to talk about for last. Ladies and gentle Moogles, it is time to talk about the single best thing 3 introduces. The jump system. Now, job classes did exist in the first game, sure, but Final Fantasy III goes ahead and asks the question, what if we not only doubled or even tripled the amount of jobs you could pick from, but also let you swap between them whenever you wanted? Which was so cool. I loved swapping from job to face any problem that came my way, especially since 3 is the first game in the franchise to introduce the job skill function, which now gave jobs more range than just what weapons or magic they could use. These could now steal, dragoons could now jump, ninjas could throw now, and dark knights could blade blitz? 1 second.
Come on, come on!
Oh, okay. So in the original version, these guys were called Mystic Knights instead of Dark Knights. That makes more sense. Using these skills in tandem with proper strategy made this easily my favorite game of the NES trilogy combat-wise. Not only does this get you that sweet, sweet character experience, but you now gain job experience to increase your job level, which grants a boost to the job you're using. Mages get more magic points and their spells become more powerful, Dragoons jump steal more damage. It adds a lot more to the jobs than them just being class changes, and I really like that. And while all of this is awesome, it is of course complemented by an absolutely fantastic map to explore. Final Fantasy 1 and 2 both had some impressive maps for the time, but 3 genuinely blows them out of the water in terms of pure scope. Like, it starts off looking like a smaller, more in-detail kind of world. But then you get the chance to leave the island and go like, holy shit, there's a whole other map! And then you get a new airship later on, let you go underwater. And it just blows your nuts off to discover there's a third map underneath the water. The amount of areas and dungeons is downright insane. From the several mainline ones you traverse through, to the multiple extra ones which net you new summons, weapons, and even some extra equipment and jobs. Also, the dungeons in this one are so much better than they were in 2. Not only did they ditch that fuck-ass garbage design of constant dead-end hallways and troll rooms, but the dungeons are now filled to the brim with secrets and cool-looking areas to explore. My personal favorite out of all of them was the Tower of Owen. Not only is it just a cool-looking area, but it also has one of my favorite moments in the entire story, but I don't want to spoil because it's super fucking cool, so we'll leave it for later. And since we're on the topic of story now, let's start talking about that. Now, 3's story is an interesting one. It's the same premise as 1, where it's a group of heroes coming together to find the 4 crystals of the element to defeat the big bad guy. But instead of just fully rehashing 1, 3 actually decides to take some elements from 2 storytelling and adds actual characters for the party to interact with, which allows the world to feel more involved and not like you're just going through the motions. And while it wasn't as in-depth as 2 was, that wasn't until 4 that they tried implementing that again, it was actually nice getting somewhat attached to this world and the characters, to the point where I got kind of teary-eyed when a few of them ended up passing away. A couple issues, sure, but it's nice that they were able to find a balance between the 2 games before it. Plus, the music is downright great. I'm not certain where 3 soundtrack ranks in terms of other Final Fantasies. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it was better than 1's, but I thought 3's was very solid. And that's it for my pros, so I think it's about time we addressed the cons. Alright, let's begin. So if you've been in any sort of discussion about the issues of Final Fantasy III, you probably know what I'm going to bring up in this section. But before we talk about those, I actually want to talk about my issues with the job system first. Now, I glazed the fuck out of the job system from pros, and I still 100% stand by it being the best part of the game. But I did actually end up having a couple of issues with this implementation in the long run, as I feel like they were both forced on you at points, but also underutilized. Contradictory, I know, but let me explain. See, 3 has certain sections of its game where you need to utilize a job to progress, like the mini stuff that I talked about earlier. Your physical attacks are pretty much worthless as a mini, so using mages are a must. Or with the General Hein boss fight where he's constantly changing his weakness, so having something like a Scholar class helps immensely. But then, you get to a section that will basically stop you from progressing unless you actively have a select job equipped. The Garuda boss comes to mind in this one, where you pretty much cannot win unless you have a Dragoon in the party, because he'll just do nothing but spam lightning and hit your whole party until you die. But while that is a pain, sure, the most annoying section in the entire game is without a doubt the Cave of Shadows, where enemies will continually divide unless you kill them using the Dark Knight class. It may seem like I don't like the forced job sections, but in truth, I do love them as a concept. In fact, that's why I wished it was not only used more, but also that it just wasn't so punishing to you. Imagine if in something like the Leviathan dungeon, you had to utilize Geomancers or Rangers to win. That would have been cool. But considering how brutal they are towards you if you don't use a required job at the right time, maybe it was for the best that they just abandoned this concept. Okay, that's enough stalling. Well, I guess it really isn't stalling considering I'm giving genuine criticism here. Let's talk about Final Fantasy III's bigger issues. Mainly its beginning, and most importantly its end. If I were to break down Final Fantasy III in terms of percentages for its quality, its first 10% would be a pretty mediocre due to the grinding and slow pacing. but it's still rather enjoyable. The next 80% is awesome, fun and addictive with incredible pacing to where grinding isn't really much of a necessity. It just moves at a smooth as butter pace. And the last 10% of the game is an absolute fucking nightmare. I wouldn't even wish on my worst enemy. But why? Well, it has to do with one section in particular, the Crystal Tower. Not only is the Crystal Tower onwards a much more challenging experience from the start of it on, but you are unable to save throughout the entire dungeon. So you're pretty much just fucked if you die, and thank God the Pixel remasters have an autosave, because holy fuck, I tried to do this without an autosave, and I just nearly snapped my controller in half. It is that frustrating. Just pure torture, plain and simple. And if you think that's bad, it gets even worse when you reach the game's true final level, the World of Darkness. Not only is it home to some of the hardest fights in the entire game, but it also may have one of the worst final bosses I've ever faced, in the form of the Cloud of Darkness. The entire fight is it just spamming Particle Beam over and over and over again, which turns this whole fight into a dull battle of attrition instead of feeling like a genuine test of your skills. It's hard to genuinely enjoy a boss, no matter whether it's at the beginning or the end of the game, when its entire battle style can be boiled down to "She shoot da beam, she shoot da beam, oh look out, she gonna shoot da beam." Not exactly sure what they were going through their heads when they were making this one. Plus, the fight is, in all honesty, nearly unbeatable if you don't have a sage or a ninja in your party, which are classes you do get in the Crystal Tower. Well, to be more exact, you get them in the extra dungeon of the Crystal Tower, which is also home to all of the best weapons in the game, and can take a couple of hours to get through, so you're basically adding on a couple extra hours to an already long Crystal Tower. Which means once you get the jobs, you now have to grind more for the job levels, making the endgame even longer than it needs to be. I could go on and on and on about this, but I'm certain by now all of you get my point. It was such a fucking downgrade in comparison to just everything else that happened in this game. Then its shittiness sticks with you after you've finally done. It's a poor ending to an otherwise fantastic title that, if they just let you save after the Crystal Tower fight, wouldn't be as rage-inducing. But you can't. And if you die, I've said enough. Other than that, I've just got no more issues, so let's just get into my final thoughts. With this review come to an end, I do have to say this. While the final hours of Final Fantasy III may have been rather poor, outside of that, I can say that Final Fantasy III was an absolute blast despite its faults, and is easily my favorite out of the NES trilogy. This game actually makes me pretty excited for when we get to 5, as I have now fallen in love with the concept of job systems. That's why my final rating for this game is a very satisfying 8 out of 10. We are now finished with the NES era of Final Fantasy. It was honestly great visiting the original era of this series and getting to experience both its highs and its lows. However, with one era finished, it's time to move on to the next one. Thank you all for watching, and if you want to join me on this journey, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button down below. Also, leave a comment down there if you're up for a chat or want to help me in the algorithm. That's all, folks. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time for more RPG content.